right, everybody, we're back on Skywatchers Radio, live again on the Dark Matter Radio Network and on PSN Radio. And I want to thank our guest of the evening, Mr. Kevin D. Randle, for sticking with us during the long break there. And Kevin, welcome to Skywatchers, my friend. It's been a while since we had you on, or I've had you on the air, and it's a pleasure to have you on here with the Dark Matter Radio Network listeners listening in tonight. How are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm doing fine, and I'm glad to be back.
Oh, man, it's been just a pleasure to have you on. We were talking about your book a little while ago that just came out on Amazon. If anybody again wants to check it out, it's called The Government UFO Files, The Conspiracy...
Government UFO Files? Or the Government UFO Secrets or something? I don't know.
Well, it says The Government UFO Files, The Conspiracy of Cover-Up.
You're apparently looking at the book, so I'll go...
I am looking at the book, yes.
What this proves is I did not pick the title.
So who picks a title for these things, then?
Usually the editor.
See, they have this roulette wheel.
I have never been any good at picking titles. The best title I ever came up with was an action-adventure book I did about the war in Vietnam, and I called it Hamlet, because it took place in a little tiny ville called a hamlet.
Oh, interesting. I'm going to have to check that out. That's funny.
So I wrote Hamlet.
Now, what got you into writing about UFOs to begin with? I mean, you've served in, like we said, in Vietnam. You served in the Iraq War, the first one. What got your attention over to UFOs? What was the first thing that did it for you?
I've always been interested in UFOs, and I always blame my mother for that. She was interested in science fiction, and science fiction is about aliens and visitation and far-reaching civilizations. And, of course, UFOs is not a huge step from that, although it's more based on reality. So I blame her for that, and I've been studying UFOs or reading about UFOs since I was in junior high school. And in fact, kind of a funny story, I was reading a book called Strangers from the Skies by Brad Steiger, and I remember reading this in probably high school. And now Brad Steiger is a good friend of mine, so... it's kind of a small world in that respect.
It's funny how that works. That happened to me also with a person that I grew up listening to, George Rodriguez of SoFloRadio.com fame. One of my shows, it's simulcast on his network. He's been on AM radio for like 30 years, and I got to meet him like 4 or 5 years ago, and now he's one of my good friends. And it blows my mind that one of the guys that I idolized growing up is a friend of mine now. It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the book, The Government UFO Files, The Conspiracy of Cover-Up. We're just coming off of what Stephen Bassett's been doing over at PRG and their citizens hearing and other stuff that they're doing. And, what do you think about the disclosure movement that's been going on for the last, 30 years? That we've been told the disclosure, and there's been so much talk of disclosure and stuff. What is your thoughts on disclosure? Do you think we're anywhere close to actually getting full disclosure from the government?
I was a participant in the hearings there in Washington, D.C.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But I've often felt that disclosure is not going to come about until the aliens decide it's time to disclose, which means rather than keeping their distance, they land and announce their presence. I don't think there's any motivation for the government to disclose what they know whatsoever. And until there's such motivation, we're going to be kind of locked in where we are. It's kind of an unfortunate thing. We just cannot force them into disclosure. The closest we came, I think, was in the mid-1990s, as we were doing an awful lot of work on the Roswell case, and Congressman Schiff started the GAO investigation to look at the files, but the scope of all of that was very limited and very narrow, and so it didn't come to fruition. And the Air Force was able to blunt it with their idiotic Project Mogul explanation for the Roswell case. And I mean, anybody who looks at the evidence realizes that Mogul does not sufficiently explain it. Not to mention the fact the flight that they picked as the culprit in that was canceled, and the documentation proves it was canceled. And so once we get beyond that, and we say, well, no matter what explanation you've offered for the Roswell case, for example, we've debunked all of those explanations. We're left with a single example, but it all sort of relates to this disclosure, and the government really has no motivation to disclose anything to us at this point.
I'm with you 100% on the whole government not having any reason or need to disclose. You're one of the few people, though, that I've heard within the UFO community who officially would say that we're not going to get disclosure until the aliens are ready to give us disclosure. Because Steve Bassett is ho-hum with this movement to try to get disclosure to happen, and he thinks he could really pressure the government to come up with or come forward with what they have. But I'm actually 100%, agreeing with you on this one. I think it really is up to them. We really have no say in this thing, do we?
No, and I think what Stephen Bassett's doing is wonderful, as it attempts to at least let the public know what's going on in the field of UFOs. So his work in that respect is useful, but
yeah, definitely, yeah.
When we get down to it, again, it's just what is the motivation for the government to disclose what they know? They
right.
Unless somebody comes forward and leaks a bunch of documents, legitimately leaks documents that we have a known provenance for, and can say, yeah, these exist, and you can go do this to get to them. And one of the better examples of that is Project Moondust. When Project Moondust was first exposed, the Air Force explanation to a United States senator was that we never had a project named Moondust. Well, we had the documents. You could FOIA the State Department, get documents, and in the government files book, as a matter of fact, I found 4 different cases in the Project Blue Book files that relate to Moondust. It says right on the project cards or in the context of the file, this is Moondust related. So we could prove that Moondust existed. And when the documents were presented back to the Air Force, they said, well, we'd like to modify our last statement. Yeah, Moondust existed, but we never used it. Well, that's not true either. We can prove that they used it. But it's because we had the documentation, we'd found the right links to make those sorts of claims. And where we stand right now, we haven't moved much beyond that. And until we do, or the aliens land and say, here we are, we're not going to be able to move forward to disclosure.
And, we haven't had any event since, I would say, Roswell, really, that's been that big of an event that could really, change the paradigm of what's going on within the UFO community. Nothing really major has happened.
I disagree with that. I'm sorry.
Well, we've had events that there were good stories have come out, but nothing that's been as solid as as I think. Look, I think Roswell happened. I'm 100% sold on that.
Do you think Phoenix Lights happened?
Well, you know what? There could be other explanations for the Phoenix Lights. There's really very little concrete evidence for the Phoenix Lights.
I think what you need to look at is multiple chains of evidence. And with the Phoenix Lights, you have some photographs, and you have eyewitness testimony, so you have 2 chains of evidence. There was a case from Levelland, Texas in 1957 where there were multiple chains of evidence. Not only did you have many, many eyewitnesses, you had the electromagnetic effects where they're stopping the car engines and dimming the lights, and then you have a possibility of a landing trace. So you've got three chains of evidence that could be explored. But everybody, whether it was the Air Force, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, APRO, you name the organization, you name the people, they were all so busy arguing about the number of witnesses, they didn't bother to gather the evidence. And I think that would have been a case that could have gone a long way to establishing the extraterrestrial had we been looking at it at the time.
Gotcha. I mean, is there, other than Roswell, is there any physical evidence that you could point to within the last 25, 30 years that we could look at? And has there been any physical evidence at all left behind by anything that is 100% legit? I mean, I know that Lloyd Pye and the Star Child Skull, I mean, that's been going on for a long time. God bless his soul. He did a lot of great work with that. And of course, Dr. Roger Lear, who we also lost, God bless his soul also. We lost 2 great men who were doing great work in their field with the implants and with the skull. But has there been any major earth-shattering thing that we just haven't heard of yet? Do you think that's out there?
Well, I think you need to look at the history of the UFO phenomenon, and when you do that, what you find out is rather than it beginning in 1947, the modern era in 1947 with the Kenneth Arnold signing, as they say, as I explain in the book, it begins in the early 1940 with what became known as the Foo Fighters. And you
Right.
have these things going on in all theaters of World War II, but what's important, there was any number of government investigations into it, because if it was an enemy weapon system, we had to know about it right away so we could counter that system. And one of the guys who worked on that was a guy named Howard McCoy.
Right.
Once the war ended, you started having the ghost rocket sightings in Scandinavia and then in Europe. And this was also very interesting to a lot of people, and you see documents circulating inside the United States government about it, and one of the guys investigating that is Howard McCoy. You get to December of 1946, which is 6 months before Arnold, and you discover that McCoy has been given orders, probably came down from Twining, but through the Pentagon from Twining to McCoy, and he sets up an unofficial investigation at Wright Field to investigate these aerial phenomena being seen. And then, of course, you have the Arnold sighting, and McCoy is now, his unofficial investigation becomes an official investigation. And when you look at the letter written in September of 1947 by Nathan Twining that says the phenomenon being talked about is something is not illusionary or fictitious. It's something real, not illusionary and fictitious. And what you discover is the guy who wrote the letter for Twining's signature was Howard McCoy. So we have this long history of our government's involvement in the investigation of UFOs, but nobody's really talking about it until the Arnold sighting gets some play in the newspapers. Right. But all this other history is kind of buried in. And you look at a book done by Keith Chester it's called Strange Company, about the Foo Fighters. You find Howard McCoy's name surfacing there. You look at the documentation from the ghost rockets, including reports going from the embassy and that sort of thing. Howard McCoy's name surfaced there. So you've got this long tradition of the U.S. government looking into these strange aerial phenomenon for at least 7 years before Arnold shows up.
Now, is it fair to say, though, that after Project Blue Book, though, I mean, things really just almost became status quo, and that's when the cover-up really just completely went full force?
Well, the cover-up had been going on all along, but what you look at is Project Blue Book, for a very short period of time, seems to be a legitimate investigation, but once Ruppelt left in 1952, beginning of 1953, it switches over to kind of a public relations outfit, and the guys who take over are anti-alien, anti-extraterrestrial, and they're working very hard to deny that. And you get to the Condon Committee in 1969, and their mission, and it's spelled out in communications that we now have, we can document, and again, I look at all of this in the government files book. But the Condon Committee's mission was to end Project Blue Book, end the Air Force investigation, say some good things about the way they handled it, say there's no threat to national security, and let that be the end of it. And so you have a university-sponsored study, an Air Force paid for the study at the university, but you have top-notch scientists saying, well, there's nothing to this. And everybody says, oh, well, there's nothing to this because they looked at it legitimately and said that. But when you look at the documentation available, you realize it was a put-up job. That was what they were supposed to do. They were successful at that, and you still have people arguing about the legitimacy of the Condon Committee and how it proved there was nothing to UFOs to be studied. And one of their cases, and it always cracked me up, one of the cases, they identified the phenomena as some natural phenomenon so rare it had never been seen before or since. Well, even if it's a natural phenomenon, this would be something that you would want to study. And they say, well, there's nothing to see here, move along. And everybody did. And so when we end up in these sort of discussions, the scientific committee says, well, we looked at it and there was nothing to it. Well, you didn't really look at it. You were bought off by the Air Force.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, the Condon Committee, that report came out, in 1969 was when they published it, right?
It came out in 1969, and then in December of 1969, the Air Force ended Project Blue Book.
Right.
And that was in. Now, an interesting thing that I discovered is looking at one of a UFO case, there are documents in the Project Blue Book files dated 1970 and 71. So in the months and the years after Blue Book supposedly ended, somebody's feeding information into the Blue Book files.
No kidding.
That I find really interesting.
That is a little shocking.
It's the same thing with Project Moondust. You get people saying, well, Moondust had nothing to do with UFOs. And as I was scanning a file, I was looking for a specific file in the Blue Book files on microfilm, and I thought I saw Moondust flash by my eyes, and I stopped and went back to this case. I found 4 cases in 1960 labeled Moondust. So there's your UFO connection to Moondust, not to mention that other documents specifically spell out what they're doing, what Project Moondust is supposed to be doing. Their mission is to recover returning space debris of foreign manufacture or unknown origin. Unknown origin, of course, would be extraterrestrial. But the documentation in Blue Book also points to the beginning of Moondust. So I was able to pinpoint the beginning of Moondust as probably October or November of 1957, because I found a letter in the Project Blue Book files dated December 12th, 1957, and they said, you have a recently created Project Moondust to look into this stuff. So, all of these examinations of what's in the government files kind of creates a different history for what went on in the UFO field, different from what we have all believed for any number of years.
Kevin, how involved do you think NASA's been over the last 40 years with the cover-up?
It's got to be involved. I know that I think it was Jimmy Carter wanted NASA to look into UFOs, and NASA said, we're not going to do that. And in a public arena, I can understand that completely, because it would just be the mess that the Air Force was in. They finally managed to extract themselves, and the Air Force or the NASA didn't want to take that on. But the point is, we're talking about space flight here. NASA has got to be involved in at least parts of this of these studies, and I know that some other people. I think Leslie Keene in her book looks at some of the NASA involvement in this. I didn't really go into depth into the NASA thing because my research took me in other directions as I was looking through all these government files. But that's another area to explore.
The NASA thing is a little bit, really scary when you think about it. If their connection is really deep with the whole phenomenon, and let's just say we do find out that there has been a major cover-up, and we do have this technology, we have back engineered, we've had it for many, many years, that we know how to fly these things, and that a lot of the things that people are seeing are, our own back engineered crafts that we've mastered how to use them and everything. I think, would there be a backlash, you think, after a disclosure, if it ever does happen with NASA, because of stuff like the Challenger disaster and other disasters have happened with that technology when we have superior technology? I don't think we
understand the technology.
That's true.
I think when you look at it, it's kind of like taking a VCR and a TV monitor back to Merlin the Magician.
Yeah.
And you show him this black ribbon, and if you know the secrets, you can get pictures and sound off it. But to understand it, you have to understand two things that are invisible, which is electricity and magnetism. There's no way he's going to be able to decode that until the technology is sufficiently advanced that he can learn these things. And I think the technology that we recovered at Roswell, for example, is so far advanced, we still haven't figured it out. We're kind of still in that primitive stage.
But let me ask you, do you think that a lot of the sightings that people have are legit alien aircrafts, or do you think a lot of it, is spec engineer stuff, or maybe technology that we've created with ideas that we got from the crashes that we've recovered?
I don't think we've really applied much of that technology to our research, because I don't think we understand it. I just don't think we understand it. I think a lot of the sightings, and this is what kind of frightening, there used to be a program on the Science Channel called Meteorite Men.
Okay.
And what caught my attention is they had a lot of videotape or DVD digital video of meteor falls. And you look at those things and you see the objects, the UFOs, the meteors breaking up, and they string out behind it, and it looks for all the world like a cigar-shaped craft with lighted windows behind it. And you're looking at that, and you say, you catch a glimpse of this out of your eye, you see it for a second, and the mind fills in the details, and suddenly you're talking about a cigar-shaped craft. And I think that explains an awful lot of the UFO sightings. It's something that people have seen out of the corner of their eye. They've seen it for a very short period of time. They don't get a good look at it.
Right.
And and they think it's something alien or something extraterrestrial when it may be a natural phenomenon they just didn't get a good look at.
Well, that kind of goes actually with...
well, hold on. When you say a natural phenomenon, you're talking about something that's actually part of this planet, or are you saying something that's man-made?
It could even be an airplane. I assume they just misidentify an airplane. That happens.
To me, that's not a natural phenomenon. Lightning's a natural phenomenon.
Yeah, it could even be lightning.
Or you can say a man-made phenomenon. I remember looking up one night and seeing what I thought was a dome-shaped disc in the sky overhead until I heard the roar of the engines, and the airplane turned just a little bit, and I realized I was looking at a pattern of the navigational lights from a specific angle that gave me the impression of a dome disc. And because I heard the engines and because it didn't fly into a cloud or something, I realized what I was looking at. So that had that not happened, I might believe that I'd seen a dome disc at that point.
Right.
But the point is, these sorts of things, if you don't get a good look at it, if it's short duration, it's probably not going to be an alien spacecraft. But you look at Levelland, for example, you're talking about people who saw the thing at close range and on the ground, but they see it for a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes. They've gotten a good look at it. It's not it's not easily explainable in terrestrial terms.
Well, how big the percentage do you think is the percentage of factual, sightings that are not just misidentified airplanes or something like that? What do you think is the percentage of the actual reports?
I think it's very small.
Very small, right? That's what I was thinking. I know that. Look, I know that Project Blue Book had 12,000 plus reports in there. MUFON has I don't know how many thousand reports.
They had 12,000. Well, Blue Book gathered 12,000 plus sightings. Of those, they said 701 were unidentified. But the problem with their statistics, and if you look at the cases, you find out 4,000 of them are labeled as insufficient data for a scientific analysis. What that means is they haven't identified it; they've merely labeled it, because they didn't want to label a case as unidentified, because then the public goes nuts. So they found a way of slapping labels on them. They labeled cases. Yeah. They labeled.
Cases. Let's rephrase this somehow so we don't get caught with our pants.
Whoa, Alan, you're breaking up there, buddy. Anyway, we'll continue. We'll continue with Alan in a second, but go ahead.
Well,
okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you. Good.
All right.
You were saying?
Yeah, what were you trying to say, Alan?
What I was saying is that it's really fascinating how the government and how not even just government, but any organization tries to rephrase what they're trying to declassify as a UFO into anything as mundane as possible. I mean, I'm tired of hearing, oh, it's swamp gas. Oh, you were hallucinating. Oh, you put the tailpipe garden hose into the cabin of the car and all the fumes. That's what got you to see what you thought you saw. It didn't really happen.
Well, that's always been a popular excuse for the government, hasn't it? But not everybody's, encounter is fake, or not everybody's encounter is real. That's what we're talking about here.
But to be fair, an awful lot of people are not familiar with what's going on in the sky around them.
That's true too.
And if you're not familiar with that, you can easily misidentify it. And I did, when I was doing my PhD dissertation, it was based on how belief structure influenced an identification of an ambiguous stimuli, which means simply you saw something quickly, and how do you identify it from that point of view? And the discovery seems to be that if you believed in ghosts and that sort of phenomena, then that was how you identified it. And if you believed in UFOs, that was how you identified it. So your belief structure kind of plays into how you identify these ambiguous stimuli, lights in the night sky, for example.
Right.
But the other side of that coin is the longer the witness had an opportunity to observe the object, and actually the higher the educational level of the witness, the more likely it wasn't going to be identified in any kind of terrestrial terms. So you've got some very good sightings that are of long duration, and by long duration would be a minute or more. The witnesses got good looks at it, and they're highly educated. So in those cases, those cases aren't easily resolvable as natural phenomena or terrestrial phenomenon.
How much do you think, Kevin, is suggested phenomenon And when I say that, I mean from like our films, TV shows, stuff that has come out in pop culture over the last 50 years that deal with the alien phenomenon, and that having an influence over people seeing UFOs. You know, I remember back in the 90s when the movie Independence Day opened up in theaters. I worked in AMC theaters back then in 1996, and when that movie came out, it was, you know, a huge opening. And when I looked at reports years later of, you know, spikes in UFO activity across the world, it was ironic that on that week, there was actually a huge spike in UFO activity, meaning that people were sighting UFOs. And I found a correlation with a lot of popular films that have come out that deal with the topic that have, for whatever reason, they're followed by what looks like a spike in people having sightings. I mean, how much do you think that plays a part in it? Also, just the actual, you know, pop culture phenomenon itself.
I think what pays actually is more important in that respect is how the media handles a UFO report. And if somebody reports a UFO sighting somewhere and they talk about that, you get a spike in sightings, not because there's necessarily more sightings going on, but people now know of a reporting point. So they call in and say, well, I saw something strange too, whereas had there not been the initial report, they wouldn't have called in because they wouldn't have known who to call. So I think that plays into it as well. It's part of it. And you look at the UFO phenomenon, there really hasn't been, I know after Close Encounters, supposedly, they said, well, there was a spike in sightings, but I think the data show that really didn't happen. The sightings were going on there. They claimed that the sightings at Levelland were a result of this launch of the second Sputnik in November of 1957. Well, if that's the case, how come there wasn't a spike in sightings in October when the first one was launched? And if you take a look at the data, you find out that the Levelland sightings actually come just prior to the peak of the sightings, but it had been building for 6 or 7 weeks prior to that, and then after, I think it's November 6th, which is 4 days after the Levelland sightings, they begin to drop off. And if you take a look at the Roswell or the 1947 sightings, you get Arnold's sighting played up in the newspapers, and then you get an awful lot of sightings. And one of the people said that, well, he'd seen something like that earlier, but he didn't think anybody believed him, so he didn't tell him until the Arnold sighting was publicized. So it wasn't that it was creating sightings; it was giving people a reporting point for that. And then the sightings drop off suddenly on July 9th, but we know why they dropped off on July 9th, 1947. There was a story in the newspapers that said the Army and Navy moved today to stop stories of flying saucers whizzing through the atmosphere. So the government, in the guise of the Army and the Navy, actually began to suppress the sighting reports. They wanted them to stop, and so the sightings went away. If you take a look at the newspapers after July 9th, there's not nearly the number of sighting reports as you'd seen prior to that.
Now, what do you make of the Lonnie Zamora incident in, 1964? April 24th, I believe?
April 24th, 1964. Yeah. Which, by the way, just so you know, statistically, I think April 24th is the day where there's the most UFO sightings.
Yeah, why is
really?
One day's got to lead. I don't know why, but they say most sightings take place between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. And you say, well, why would that be? Well, obviously because people are outside at that time.
That makes sense.
The day that it used to be, and I don't know if it's changed that. The day that you used to have the most sightings was Wednesday.
Oh wow!
I don't know why. The Zamora sighting is very good, but you have essentially a single witness, Lonnie Zamora. You have landing traces, which would be a second chain of evidence.
Right.
So you've got some good stuff like that, but then you get the debunker crowd in there, who don't really care about the facts that much, and claiming, well, Zamora was fooled by this, that, and another thing. And I know Phil Klass said that this guy was outside in his garden, which was 1,000 feet from where Zamora was supposedly, saw the sighting, and he didn't hear anything and he didn't see anything. And you go back and look at and the guy actually said, well, I walked over to where this happened and I didn't see anything going on, which is preposterous because from the point of the takeoff, there was all kinds of activity there. So clearly that wasn't true. But you look at the original statements, well, the guy was in his house, not out in his garden, and it wasn't, and the house wasn't 1,000 feet away. It was nearly a mile away. So you've got the debunkers getting in there, kind of throwing mud, stirring the pot so that
right.
the stuff is overlooked. But the Samora sighting, if there had been additional witnesses, it would be a great sighting. There were two guys from Dubuque, Iowa, who supposedly there. Their story appeared in the newspaper some days later. I've spent the last couple of years trying to track these guys down to see what they said, because a UFO investigator in Iowa supposedly talked to them and said, well, their stories didn't mesh, and he didn't believe them, so he thought they made the stories up. I'd like to talk to them today and see what they have to say. One of the things I found is, and you see this repeatedly, especially in the UFO photographs, is that if it was a teenage boy who took the photographs, 20 years later he admits it. Well, I faked that photograph, and I don't know how many great photographs have been ruined by the culprits coming out and say, yes, I faked those. One of the exceptions, of course, is the Lubbock, Texas pictures taken in 1951. But I'm
still waiting for our one-armed friend from Switzerland to come forward and say, it was all a joke.
The contactees never do that. They never come forward and tell us that.
Their wives come forward and say, it was all fake.
But the Samora sighting, if I could find one of these guys and talk to him, it may provide a second witness to part of the sighting, which would be great. So then we have not only Zamora, but two other guys at a separate location seeing it. You've got the landing traces and that sort of thing. So the Zamora sighting would be a great sighting. I know one of the latest things is kids at the New Mexico Institute of Technology, or whatever the heck, Mining and Technology, or whatever the hell the name of the college there in Socorro is, did it as a prank because they didn't like Zamora. And I know there's some people who subscribe to that and truly believe they found the answer. But those guys haven't come forward to admit it either. So you're kind of looking for that
hokey.
sort of thing.
I think I'm going to call the first bat squatch of the night. I'm beating you to that one, Alan. Let's talk about some of the evidence. You're talking about trace evidence. We're talking about burned vegetation, soil, ground landing impressions, stuff like that, right? Metal scrappings also were found.
Yeah, not in Zamora. You've got the burned area. You've got you've got landing craft pods apparently on the ground, and you've got footprints. I think there's footprints there. I in my mind's eye, I see this picture of a footprint, but I think that's Brooksville, Florida, which is a whole different kettle of fish. But you've got stuff on the ground left behind by the craft as it took off. And so if you had additional witnesses, it would be a stronger case. Zamora clearly was telling the truth about what he'd seen.
He really would have no reason to lie. I mean, the man was a police officer. Why would he lie?
I can point to any number of high-ranking military officers who've lied about their UFO involvement. And
but randomly, just some guy, some police officer, just some random police officer, coming up with a story like that, it really makes no sense.
No, it's one of two things. It's either a hoax, and he had no part in it.
Right.
He was fooled by it, or it was alien visitation of some kind.
Right.
Unless it was an experimental craft from White Sands, which isn't all that far away, but there's no documentation to support that. And at this point, they were talking about it actually was a lunar lander that had gotten off the range that Zamora saw, but there's no documentation to support that. And at this point, the lunar lander, we all know what it looks like. We all know how it worked. So there's no reason for that to be hidden anymore. So, unfortunately, that was us. And that hasn't happened either. So, we're left with either a hoax or alien visitation, I think, in that case.
That's interesting. Yeah,
I was going to say, what's your opinion on the actual moon landing? Was it real or was it not real? How about that one?
It was real, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
I'm going to call the bat squatch on that one.
Yeah, I'm with you, Kevin. I think we've been to the moon, and I don't think that's even debatable at this point. But what we found on the moon, I think, is what people should be talking about. Because, Kevin, have you seen the video that's been on YouTube for the last couple of years now? I know YouTube is not the greatest source of information because you can hoax anything easily. But there's a video that's been making the rounds, the Mona Lisa alien, which was supposedly found by one of the Apollo missions on the moon. Have you seen this video?
No, I have not.
Oh, my goodness, it's a shame.
It says that there's an Apollo 20 mission, and
Right.
that actually landed near a ancient craft that they pulled a mummified humanoid out of.
Does this thing come flying out of it and stick on your face?
No.
And then another alien bursts out of your chest, and you're.
I'm
really
surprised you haven't heard of this video. I'm going to send you a link so you can look at it.
Okay.
In fact, in one of the parts of the clip, you could actually see the astronaut's face as the camera is panning towards the astronaut and then towards the body of the being they found. I couldn't identify the astronaut myself, but anybody out there who's looking the video up right now on YouTube, if you can, please let us know. Call us up 786-245-8127 is the call-in number. And again, we're live on Dark Matter Radio Network with our guest Kevin D. Randle. So we'd love to hear from you. Call in and let us know if you know who that astronaut is, because you can't see a face, Kevin. You can clearly see a face. He's flipping around the camera. There's like at least two cameramans involved. I've had people that have worked for NASA told me that the inside of what looks like the shuttle is very it's on point with what they have and what they've seen in the past, and especially in that time period in the 70s. So it's in line with that kind of technology.
It looks legitimate.
It looks very legit, yeah. And the body looks Middle Eastern, which is kind of awkward, but definitely not human, but very humanoid Middle Eastern kind of look, which is very interesting. Look, in India, they believe in aliens, so that's not that far-fetched. That's part of their beliefs, people.
Mostly on YouTube, I watch videos of old great classic songs from the 60s.
You would love this video, though, and it's been around for a while. I'm surprised more people haven't caught on to this thing. Nobody's come forward to debunk it. It looks legit. Like I said, it looks like it belongs.
If you can't really get
with
to the
NASA's
provenance
footage.
Where it came from,
That's the problem.
You've got a real problem at the beginning. And in today's environment, with the abilities of home cameras and home editing bays and all of that, you can do incredible stuff.
Oh, no kidding. Well, that's today, but look, just 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we had the alien autopsy on Fox, which fooled millions of people. And then Rayson Tilley said, "Oh, by the way, I was only kidding." Made the whole thing up.
I think
How do you feel about that?
Well, if you take a look at a lot of what was written about the alien autopsy back in that time frame in the realms of UFO research, an awful lot of us were very suspicious of that thing, and chasing down the name of the cameraman and all of this sort of thing. And once again, there was no provenance for it. We couldn't get to the camera. Who's the cameraman? Well, I can't tell you. You don't think the government doesn't know who it is? I mean, if it was a legitimate autopsy, they're going to know exactly who was involved in it. And they're going to know exactly who was there photographing the thing. They're going to know exactly who this guy is. And he's saying this dumb thing like, "Well, yeah, I had this extra footage and it was highly classified, but they never came to get it and they never found it was missing." Yeah, right. I believe that story too.
It's only footage of an extraterrestrial being from another planet. That's all it is. Why would the government want that?
Santilli cleaned up on that one.
Yeah, he did.
He made millions off that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from what I understood that he was selling copies of the raw footage for $50. Sell you a videotape for $50. If those of you who are younger in the audience probably don't know what videotape is, it's like a DVD, or a little different. But he was selling the videotapes for $50 a pop, and he sold at least 1 million copies. So there's $50 million, and I think it cost him around $100,000 to make.
Yeah, that was the budget for the whole production, about $100,000.
Yeah, and I did a book called Alien Mysteries and Cover-Ups and all that, which is the book that preceded Government Files, which is available. You can get a Kindle version of it. The Kindle version of the Government Files isn't out yet. But in there, I had an opportunity to communicate with Philip Mantle in Great Britain, and he was one of those that exposed a lot of that and was able to give me photographs and illustrations of how they created this whole thing. And so, we still have people who believe the alien autopsy is real, which just boggles my mind when you've got the guy saying, "Yeah, we made it, and here's how we did it," and the guy who's responsible says, "Yeah, it's kind of a hoax," and they're saying, "Well, a couple frames of this fake footage is real footage." Yeah, I'm buying that. You got me on board.
Well, it's funny because there's a part in the footage where you can see wreckage, and you can see faces of certain people within the army surrounding the being on the floor. But it's very grainy, very hard to see the faces of the military folks.
In the alien autopsy, you see nobody's face.
No, not in that one. It's companion footage. If you bought the VHS, which I am one of the suckers that bought it back in the 90s, and yes, I did buy the VHS. At the very end, there's a little bit of additional footage. They show some of the wreckage.
Yes.
And recently, now there's even more footage that's made its way online, which actually shows them carrying a body into, I guess would be one of the hangars, and there's a bunch of the military men around the body, and you see the cameraman trying to get a good shot, and really the being that's on the floor is the same looking being as the one in the video. I mean, there's no difference between them.
Well, then it must be real.
It must be real then, right? But, I mean, you can see faces on that thing, which is, what gets me. It's,
earlier you were talking about how Independence Day may have spiked UFO sightings. Mm-hmm. Right after the alien autopsy came out, because they talked about the being with the 6 fingers.
Right.
And I know Russ Estes, a friend of mine, and Bill Cohn, we were working on a book about abductions. And we began looking carefully and listening to what the witnesses were saying to see if anybody started talking about 6-fingered beings, because here was the perfect key for it, and that just never developed.
Really,
just never had anybody talk, because they had that in the wreckage footage they had that sort of display where you put your fingers, and there were 6 finger places.
Right.
And the thing that cracked me up, because you had Jesse Marcel Jr. talking about this little I-beam that was seen with the symbology on it. And then you see the wreckage in the alien autopsy film, and
you see the beam there,
huge beam. There's nothing like what Jesse Marcel described. And if you look at the lettering, it says video on it. Now, what are the odds that you've got an alien writing system, communication system, and you're going to be able to make out an English word on this I-beam? Yeah, it's stylized, but it says video, and you say, yeah, that makes sense to me.
I've never noticed that myself. Alan, you had a question for Kevin. Sorry about cutting you off.
I was actually going to throw out the question. With all the stuff that's leaked and all the stuff that's available and disclosure and everything, I'm wondering, what do you think Snowden has on his hands about UFOs and the government?
He may not have gotten anything at all out of it, because the stuff is very compartmentalized, and I'm not sure that he would have been able to access files that would have had this stuff in that. It may have been separated into a different computer system. It may not even be on a computer system, given the nature of it. I think that there's enough people out there who have pawed through the documents, although there's an awful lot of material that he did. If something ufologically related had come up, I think we'd know about it by now. I think somebody would have found it. So I don't think there was anything that he was. I don't think he had access to anything like that. He didn't have access to everything, but he had access to an awful lot of stuff.
Now, actually, there's a question that we had earlier that I wrote down that Alan had, which was a really good one. How many people in the Army and military do you think really know about the UFO reality?
Or actually involved in disclosing it was where I was going with it.
Other than me?
Other than you, yeah.
I don't think. I think at this point, I think it's moved beyond military control. I don't think there's very many people in the military who have any real access to it. I think in 1947, because of the way it was discovered at the Roswell base and the military having control of it at that point, once they moved it out of Roswell, once they got it to Wright Field, once they began the research into it, I think it moved into a whole other arena, and the military lost control of it. So I don't think there's much. I don't think the military has much control over it, and I don't think there's very many military people who really know about this stuff. There may be some guys in very specialized duties. I'm thinking specifically of medical personnel. Maybe somebody that has some very specialized physics might have access to some of this material, but I think very few military people would be involved in today's environment.
Which kind of makes banging on Washington's door to give you disclosure kind of a moot point, doesn't it?
Well, the president has got to know, but the president doesn't have to
Not necessarily.
know.
Yeah, he doesn't have to know.
He doesn't have to know, but I think the president can find out if he wants to know.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Clinton tried to find out, Kevin, and it didn't go too well for Clinton.
I don't. I think if I'm the president, I can find out. I don't think you can stop me because I'm basically your boss. And so, say the NSA, for the lack of a better organization, let's say they control it.
Right.
And so I say to the director of the NSA, I want to know about this UFO stuff. He said, well, it's highly classified. I can't tell you. I said, well, you're going to tell me now, or you're fired. And your deputy becomes the new director, and I'll ask him. And I'll just keep going down the line till I find somebody who will answer the question for me.
You know, last president that really inquired that deeply about the UFO subject was Kennedy, and didn't end too well for him.
Well, I don't think that really has much. I'll bat squatch on you now. Crying out! You got to bring guests on to call bat squatch on you. For crying in a bucket.
That's the first I've been called twice, bat squatch. No, but Kennedy, a couple weeks before he died, there's a report that he was snooping around and asking questions about UFOs and aliens.
There's a report that he was going to withdraw American forces from Vietnam, and so he was assassinated because of that. They wanted to get the United States more deeply involved in Vietnam, or he and Bobby pissed off the mafia, so they got him, or Fidel was getting even for the assassination attempts on him, or Bay of Pigs. So you can just go in any direction you want there.
Yeah, that's true. There's so many people that wanted Kennedy dead, huh?
Not necessarily. I'm just saying there's so many conspiracy theories of who wanted Kennedy dead.
Well, the reason there's so many conspiracy theories is because there's a lot of folks out there that wanted him dead.
But you can
moving on
practically of any president.
True.
I mean, the president, no matter who the president is, he's going to offend probably half the country.
Yeah, that's true. At least half, yeah.
He's going to. Well, Mitt Romney got in trouble for saying something about 47% of the people aren't going to vote for him. Well, that's true.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who you are, what party you belong to. X number of people aren't going to vote for you simply because you're of the other party. They don't care what you say. They don't care what you do. They're not going to vote for you because you're not a Democrat. They're not going to vote for you because you're not a Republican. And so he was absolutely right on that. And so no matter who the president is, he's going to offend people. I just saw online today a picture of a bullet hole in the window of the White House. Because they sentenced some guy who'd opened up on the White House with an AK. So Barack Obama apparently offended somebody immensely, and the guy was so dumb he's going to shoot up the White House. Like that's going to do any good.
That guy's been offending. He's been offending people since before he became president.
But
they were just offended.
There's no history of him really before him being president.
Well, he was in Chicago for years as at least 4 years as senator, wasn't he?
Yeah,
Senator
but
Obama?
they shut all the other. All his major records are sealed. Come on.
But the point is, no matter who the president is, he's gonna offend people. They're not going to
X amount of people. Yeah.
I remember standing in the talk in Baghdad, and somebody brought up President Bush getting jobs for everybody. He said, "Yeah, he got me a job. I didn't want it, but I got one because I'm standing there in Baghdad."
Yeah.
And it wasn't real comfortable in Baghdad. It was hot in the summer. I mean, really, really hot. And then, believe it or not, it got cold in the winter and rainy, and the water didn't go anywhere, so you just couldn't really drive down the road without your windshield getting all dirty. It was just terrible. Terrible. But I digress.
That is the worst job ever. Thank you, Mr. Bush.
Well, I don't know. That was actually a pretty good job. I just didn't want it.
You and many others. Now, what do you moving on to back into UFOs here for a second. Betty and Barney Hill has always been one of my favorite cases within the UFO community. What's your thought of that case? Because there's a lot there for people who want to, people that want to look at something that has some legit info that can be documented. I think that's one of the few cases that really has something legitimate that came out, like the star map, for example.
Well, funny you should bring up the star map, because we've discovered since Marjorie Fish did her experimentation on that a lot of the stars she used were not where they thought she thought they were. In other words, the star catalogs have changed.
Oh,
so some of the stars she thought was within 50 light years or not. And she arbitrarily dismissed all red dwarf stars because there's so many of them. And she said, well, there would be nothing circling a red dwarf star that you'd be interested in, because the theory was that there would be no planets around red dwarfs. And I think that's been proven to be untrue. So the star map needs to be revisited, is what I'm saying. If you want to look at this thing, somebody with good computer skills, because you don't have to build the physical models that Marjorie Fish built back in the 70s, you can do it with your computer. Somebody needs to revisit that. But there is at least 4 solutions to the star map, including Marjorie Fish's. One of them was around the Zeta 1, Zeta 2 reticuli, which is Marjorie Fish, and there's one that suggested what the star map really showed was the planet alignment in the solar system at the time. There's another one that I think was out in near the constellation of Hercules. So there was some discussion about exactly which star field fit the map as well. So I think the star map information is out of date. At best, it's out of date and needs to be revisited. So you can look at it from that point of view. I know that Bud Hopkins said that there was no traditional sci-fi gods and devils that would have given the idea to Barney and Betty Hill prior to their experiences. But you look at a movie called Killers from Space, one of the worst science fiction movies ever made, starring Peter Graves. And what you have in that movie, which I think was either 1954 or 1956. Peter Graves is killed in an airplane accident. He shows back up at the base. They're studying an atomic bomb. He shows back up at the base, and under hypnotic regression, he tells a tale of being abducted by these big-eyed aliens, and he's got an unexplained scar on his chest, and he remembers nothing consciously. So, I mean, you've got the abduction scenario laid out in this really crappy movie that I'm sure that Barney and Betty Hill never saw.
Yeah, I don't think they have.
But I remember the one thing I remember growing up, seeing it on the Late Late Show, and the thing that always got by me was Peter Graves driving down the road, and there's these big eyes staring at him, and he can't figure out what that's all about. And that was the one thing I remembered from the movie until I'd seen it later. And you buy a collection of science fiction films, that film is invariably on it because it is really so bad, and I think the copyright is like expired and nobody cares. So you can put it on your collection of science fiction movies very, very cheaply. But the point simply is, so you've got science fiction film that gives you a model of alien abduction, which doesn't mean that the Barney and Betty Hill got it from there. So you have to look at all of that stuff. If there is an abduction phenomenon, I think it would more closely resemble what Barney and Betty Hill talked about, which would be a sort of a target of opportunity thing, as opposed to as it's developed recently. And I blame myself for that. I think I'm the first one to ever report the aliens coming into the house, and it was a case in Utah in 1973, and I reported it in the Saga's UFO report, I think in 1976 is when the article came out, and it's the first time anybody had reported aliens being in the house and dragging the people out to the flying saucers. So that, since that time, others have said, well, that was what happened to me prior to that, but I think that's the first time you can find it being actually reported anywhere.
That's not the one that was videotaped, was it?
Pardon me?
Was that the one that was videotaped by the family?
No.
Oh, okay, so it's not that one, okay.
This would have been, 73 is when it happened, and videotape was just... It was 73? No, I think 73 is too early for videotape to really explode. I think it was... When did videotape really explode on the scene? Was it in the 1980s?
Well, yeah, it was in the early mid-80s around there.
Yeah. So, no. But it was...
Well, I'm talking about the McPherson tapes, by the way. I'm sure you're familiar with that case.
No, this was the Pat Roach in...
Gotcha.
In near Provo, Utah, and she said two of her daughters and I think two of her sons were taken on board the craft. The problem with the case is James Harder was the guy that helped me with the investigation, and he thoroughly contaminated the witnesses before we got a good chance to interview them.
Okay, now here's an interesting question then that I'm going to throw out as we're talking about all the science fiction movies, if that's okay. With all the science fiction movies that have been made and done out there, with the information and knowledge that you have, is there any movies that are true to information that might be locked away in some of the files and some of the stories that are out there?
We did a movie called Roswell for Showtime, and I think it was based on the book that Don Schmidt and I had done, and both of us were on the sets at various times as technical advisors, and they tried to follow the story as closely as they possibly could, given the fictional construct of the film. And at one point on the set, I had mentioned to the director, because he said, if there's something wrong, let me know. And I mentioned something, some minor military protocol thing to the director, and he said, well, okay, thank you, but you have to remember we're making a movie and not a documentary. So there may be elements that coincidentally match the UFO phenomena. There are movies that were made specifically. Earth versus the Flying Saucer springs to mind, which was supposedly based on Don Kehoe's book, but it really has nothing to do with Kehoe's book or anything else, but it's a fun movie.
I always thought the show that lasted one season, Dark Skies, was possibly something that could conceivably have happened in reality, something very close to that. What do you think of that show?
I watched the first one and really couldn't get into it.
Oh, really? Remember, that was a long time ago. That came out in the 90s. That was killed because of the X-Files. It was so popular back then. But it was really a great series. If you get through the first couple episodes, it'll hook you right in. It only lasted one season. So.
Yeah, I didn't watch that. I did get the Surface, which was the NBC thing that came out. It lasted for most of the season, which was kind of interesting. And I got the DVDs for Invasion because they were really cheap, which was the CBS thing that came out at the same time. But I haven't been able to get through it. I just, I try to force myself to watch it. I just can't get into the thing. It just really wasn't very well made. It wasn't very interesting. And apparently everybody in that thing was an alien, so it...
Well, also, by the way, for the listeners, not to be confused with the movie that came out last year called Dark Skies, is a different, different thing altogether. This is the one created by Bryce Sable.
I think the science fiction movie that most closely resembles the UFO phenomenon would be Ender's Game. I just said that because
you love that movie.
Yes, I like the book a lot better, but I just thought I'd bring that up to see if I could inspire enough people to buy the DVD that maybe or watch it on demand that maybe they would make a sequel to it.
It is a great movie. I would love to see a sequel to that movie also. Once again, we're sitting here with author Kevin D. Randle, the author of the book The Government UFO Files: The Conspiracy of Cover-Up. Kevin, the book is available for paperback, but it's going to be available for Kindle pretty soon.
I suspect that they're waiting on the Kindle.
Because that's how I read my books, man. I'm going to be honest with you. That's how I read everything.
I do the same thing. I didn't think I'd ever want to read a book on an electronic device, and I bought one off Amazon on the Kindle, and it's just a great way to do it because A, they're cheaper, and B, you can take it wherever you go. Mm-hmm. But I suspect that the book will be available on Kindle. The official release date is May 14th, and I suspect that's when the Kindle version will appear. But the paperback version is out, and the publisher told me that they had called the various distributors and warehouses and said, go ahead and release the book into the bookstores. So it should be in bookstores by the middle of the month, and it'll be probably another 6 weeks before we see it on Kindle.
Very cool. But if you guys want to pick up the paperback, it is available. Go to Amazon.com right now and look up The Government UFO Files: The Conspiracy of Cover-Up. Again, a name that Kevin D. Randle had nothing to do with picking.
but
nothing.
And I'll try to remember what it is.
Now, when we're on break, we're talking about ancient astronauts and the very, very popular show that's on TV that we talked about. You haven't been on that show. What's your theory on, or what's your thoughts on the ancient astronaut theory?
Well, this allows me to promote another one of my books, the Alien Mysteries book, which does have a Kindle version on Amazon right now. And I looked at sightings beginning many many, many years ago, 12,000
Uh-huh.
years ago, the Dopa stones, for example, I look at those as ancient astronauts. I wanted to do something with Baghdad, which was Ezekiel and his wheel, simply because not Baghdad, but Babylon, because I'd been to Babylon and I had lots of pictures. I can give the editor pictures of Babylon that I took myself personally. But I looked at an awful lot of those cases and those sightings, and the thing that concerned me about a lot of this is our ancestors' lack of understanding of what was going on in the atmosphere around them, so that if they saw a meteor, a bolide, for example, they would classify, well, here's this flaming spear drawn across the sky. And you think, okay, well, that could be a flying saucer of some kind, but it also could be a meteorite. And they didn't understand those sorts of things. So you have to, when you look at those sorts of things, you have to look at them very, very carefully. When you start postulating that the structures that the ancient astronaut theorists point to, I just don't see anything that would be outside the capability of the people alive at that time to do if they really set their minds to it.
Like
I'm thinking,
Puma Punku was the one that really stood out to me, and I'm like, really? Because I saw a documentary with Michael Heiser who completely debunked them and kind of like proves that we could have done that back then.
Well, and the thing I look at is you've come from outer space, so clearly you've got some kind of metallurgy, because I'm sure you're not flying around in stone spaceships.
Right.
And you come to Earth, and the only building material you can find is stone.
More rocks. Yeah.
You can't teach these people some metallurgy.
Right.
That sort of thing. And you look at their astronomy. They knew about the planets you can see with the unaided eye, but they didn't know about the stuff beyond that. And you would think that there would have been some hints about that. And I know if you look at the Egyptian hieroglyphics, there's one thing that looks an awful lot like a light bulb with a filament in it.
Right.
But it's also explainable in the mythology of the Egyptians of what it was. And
right.
So, I'm very ambivalent. I think the evidence for ancient astronauts, would there have been visitation back then? I don't know. I would say if I'm a spacefaring race, and I find a planet that's got life on it, and I show up, say, 15,000 years ago, and it's all very primitive, I might not be interested in coming back for a while.
Right. It makes no sense. Yeah.
But on the other side, on the other hand, if I show up, say, 2,000 years ago, well, I see civilization. I don't see much industrialization, but I see civilization, and I see evidences of intelligence. Well, I might be inclined to come back more often. If I show up in 1940, and I see that we are experimenting with rockets, Goddard in, coincidentally, Roswell, New Mexico. I see industrialization. I see advanced civilization confined to the planet, but beginning to take the steps into space. I might be inclined to show up more often to take a look around. So, I look at all of that, but I look at the evidence for the ancient astronaut stuff, and I just don't find it to be that persuasive. The Dopa stones are really problematic. The theories about it, when you try to trace down the academics who were involved supposedly in the research into these things, the trail goes cold. You can't find anything about them. There's no papers that they wrote. You cannot find those sorts of things. And
right.
Without that, you got to say, well, but that's very problematic. And I think when we do any UFO research, whether it's that or we're looking at modern sightings, we're looking at documentation like MJ12, whatever, we've got to be very problematic in how we advance there. And if we cannot take these things to their original source, then we've got to be very careful about what we say to them, because if we endorse these things and they blow up, the alien autopsy is a perfect example. If we endorse this as, here's absolute proof that aliens have been visiting, and the next thing we know, we've got Ray Santelli saying, well, I invented this whole thing, and here's how we did it. Well, that really undercuts our credibility and takes away from the legitimate areas of ufological research.
Kevin, I'm going to admit live on air that I actually had a party during the week that the alien autopsy video aired on Fox, just to have all my friends over and be like, see, aliens are real, look! And we all looked at it and dissected it, and we all fell for that thing, man. I can imagine how many people worldwide had similar reactions that I had. I mean, it just fooled everybody.
Well, if you watched it closely, you would have seen me on that alien autopsy.
Yeah.
But the thing was,
yeah.
But the thing is, the
Wait
way
a minute, that was you on the table?
No,
no, but he is in there.
They the way they cut my answers in, it made it sound like I was more positive about the reality of it than I actually was. I was very negative when we did the interviews, so the editing of that wasn't quite as fair as it could have been, credible as it could have been. They were going for one thing, and that was that the alien autopsy was real.
Well, Kevin, when you went into that thing and you were doing your part in there, I mean, did you have a whiff of this being a hoax at all? How much did you know about what you're looking at?
I saw the thing probably before an awful lot of people in the country did. The guys from Channel 4 in England, Channel 4 being like a national channel in Great Britain, had brought it over. So I saw the tent footage,
okay,
which was really horrid, and then I saw the footage of the wreckage as well, which just cracked me up, especially when I saw the video on there. With the autopsy stuff, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff in there that I could look at with a critical eye, because I'm not trained as a pathologist, and say this is wrong and that's wrong. But a couple of friends of mine could. And one of them said that it reminded him of a dress set, meaning this is the kind of thing you would expect in a science fiction movie, as opposed to a real morgue or operating theater. And that the guys who were doing the autopsy weren't as skilled as they could be. And the one thing that I noticed is they seem to be very cavalier in their treatment of it. They cut the thing open and they're pulling organs out and that sort of thing. And I'm thinking, shouldn't this autopsy take like 2 weeks to do? Because once you make an incision, aren't you going to make a great photographic record of that before you start pulling crap out? And they peel these lenses off the eyes, we know exactly what those are. They don't belong there, and they peel them off. And so it was very problematic that way.
One answer for that, though, would be, they had more than one body, so this is just one of several autopsies that they conducted. So, I mean, that would be kind of a way to answer that, wouldn't it?
I don't think so, because you don't know that we, meaning here on Earth, believed that the Neanderthal was a hunched-over, brute-like creature, and that was based on the skeletal remains of a single individual that happened to have been, now we know, had been hunched over because of arthritis. He had very bad arthritis. So you've got an alien creature, and even if there is another one or another three available, you don't have any baseline yet. And so the first one you look at may be deformed in some fashion that we don't understand. And so when you look at the second one, you're still going to perform the same kind of careful autopsy to make sure everything agrees with what you saw on the first one.
That makes sense. It's like not every two Earthlings are the same when you dissect them.
No, I mean, you've got people with 6 fingers. You've got.
Well, you don't have that many people with 6 fingers anymore. During the Middle Ages, anybody who ended up with 6 fingers was a sign of the devil, and they pretty much killed them off.
Yeah,
it's called polydactyly, right? Having multiple fingers.
But the point simply is, we have people who vary greatly. Well, the other thing is, let us say we were going to put a representation of Earth people on a flying saucer and fly to another planet. You could start out with a pygmy and a Watusi, and you've got two perfectly normal human beings that are radically different in their sizes, and then put a Swede on there with her long blonde hair and her blue eyes and her really white skin, and now you've got another great variation, or put someone with an Asian descent on there. You've got, again, another great variation of what the humans look like. So you put those 4 people on a spacecraft and send them somewhere, and now you cannot really draw any great baseline of what a human looks like.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, all right. My argument is moot. Bat squatch on myself on that one. Kevin, looking at the book here, what is the most controversial or the most shocking discovery that you wrote about in the book, The Government UFO Files: Conspiracy of Cover-Up? Like, what's the one thing that really stood out to you when you were writing this book?
That the investigation predates the Arnold sighting.
Mm.
That we look at the history of UFOs, and we all have talked about it, the modern era begins on June 24th, 1947, with Kenneth Arnold made his sighting. That is simply untrue. The thing starts, the modern era starts in 1940 and they didn't call them Foo Fighters, and they didn't call them Foo Fighters until 1944, but those sightings that took place during World War II, and remember World War II began in 1938 in Europe, and actually in 1932 in Asia when Japan invaded Manchuria. But so you've got this thing going on. So it predates that, and you can link it with a single guy, Howard McCoy. I think that's one of the radical things that I have found out, and that we had an unofficial investigation of UFOs that began in December of 1946. And you look at that and you say, wow, they knew more about what was going on than they were letting on. And,
no kidding.
And I think they were confused about it right up until the Roswell case. And you look at that, and on July 8th, they say, well, we got one. We got a flying saucer. And the next day, they say, or 3 hours later, they say, no, we didn't. It was a weather balloon. And the next day, they say, we learned that the Army and Navy began to attempt to suppress the stories of flying saucers. So, we look at that early history, and I think that's one of the radical alterations I make to UFO history, is by looking at all of that sort of thing and saying, it began a lot earlier than we thought. And I'm disregarding like the airship of 1897. I'm regarding some of the airship sightings in the early 19th century.
Sightings, right?
I'm looking specifically at the beginning, what I think of as the beginning of the modern era, and I think it begins in 1940, 1941 as that's the point it begins.
Now, are you referencing the Delshop airships of the 1800s?
Well, the 1897 airship, that was reported over the United States in March and April. We got the big Aurora, Texas crash of April 17th, 1897.
Okay.
And the one that really cracks me up is in the other book, the Alien Mysteries book. I had an illustration from one of the newspapers of what this thing looked like when it supposedly crashed on the fairgrounds in Waterloo, Iowa. And the editor working on the book found a photograph of this damn thing from the fairgrounds of Waterloo. It's a hoax, and an admitted hoax, but it just astonished me that I never thought to go to Waterloo and say, hey, anybody got a picture of this damn thing? Because I had an illustration. I didn't think in the terms of pictures in 1897, but there was actually a photograph that appears in the book, and that just kind of astonished me. So, but I look at the modern era beginning 6 years earlier than we thought before, and connect it all with Howard McCoy looking at this stuff. And McCoy goes beyond 1947. I think it's in 1948. He's at a meeting and he says, we wish one would crash so we would know what they are. Howard McCoy's lying to those people because one had crashed.
One had crashed already, yeah.
But,
possibly even more.
Somebody tells you there hasn't been a crash, you don't look for it.
That's true. Have you? How many? I don't know how many people have come forward, but how many reports have you seen over the years of multiple crashes at Roswell? Because I know there's been reports that 2 ships crashed at Roswell.
No, there was a single craft, but it broke up.
Oh, okay.
And I know Stan believes there was a collision and one came down on the plains of Augustine, but the Barney Barnett story just does not track when you look at the whole thing. But if you look at it, it looks like the thing broke up, and wreckage fell in 3 distinct locations. Starting with the Brazel Ranch, or the Foster Ranch, if you want to be technical, moving south southeast toward Roswell, there's 3 distinct sites.
Kevin, do you think at this point, if the government does come forward with any story that is the actual truth, short from telling us that aliens did crash at Roswell, do you think we'd believe them if it wasn't aliens that really crashed at Roswell, if that was the real truth?
I think if they had the proper documentation, and that was the problem they ran into with the mogul explanation for Roswell, this experimental balloon. They said, well, it was so highly classified, nobody knew the name. He didn't even know the name. Well, that turns out not to be true, because you look at the diary of one of the scientists on it. He mentions mogul a half a dozen times in his diary, so clearly he knew the name.
Right.
They say, well, it was flight number 4 that took off on June 4th, 1947. Well, according to the diary, that flight was canceled. So it couldn't have been that. But it says, well, they flew what they called a surface flight later on, or a cluster of balloons. We know what that is, too, based on other parts of the diary. It tells us what the cluster was, and it was nothing to scatter the metallic debris on the Brazil Ranch. So the explanation fails on those points. But if the government came forward and said, well, this was an experimental, say they tried to shoot guys to the moon for some reason in a rocket off white sands. Preposterous idea. But let's say they thought, well, we can do this, and it crashed on the Brazil Ranch, and we've got 3 or 4 dead Americans or whatever because of that. That would be something worth the government would want to bury in 1947. Today's environment, the guys responsible for that are long gone. There's nobody to hold accountable. And if they found some records and they had photographs and they had the records to prove it, then we've got to say, that's the explanation. But they haven't ever all they come up with this, well, it was this top secret balloon. Well, it wasn't a top secret balloon, because pictures of the damn thing showed up in the newspaper 2 days later. On July 10th, they show a picture of a mogul array and launching the things from Alamogordo. So clearly it's not that highly classified.
Right. No, and not only that, even the test dummies argument was moot because of the simple fact that they weren't experimenting with those things at that time.
Well, but see, Philip Corso explained that. That was time travel. If you look at he did a follow-up to his book Day After Roswell. There was a follow-up that he wrote himself, so he couldn't blame it on Burns. And somebody put it up on the internet, and so I was able to download a copy of it and read it. And he's explaining the multiple crashes and the dummies because the things collided, and one fell in 1947 and the other one fell in 1957.
Right, that's a logical answer.
Well, because of the time travel aspects.
Yeah. Do you think the Nazis had any interest in UFOs? I know that's also been a big thing in ufology now, the Nazis and their possible connection. I see nothing to support that conclusion at all. I just don't see it. And, that's another one of those things. If Hitler had a flying saucer, we'd probably all be speaking German now. That's been my argument for years when I hear people talk about that. But it does make for interesting storylines. But on the other side of the coin, you could say, well, yeah, but he had a jet fighter, which could have really torn up our bomber formations if he had deployed it properly, but he wouldn't deploy it the way it should have been used. Hitler determined how the ME-262 would be deployed in a combat environment, and it was not the best way to use it because we really didn't have anything a way to defend against it, and yet he wouldn't deploy it in the proper numbers in the proper location. So, in some respects, you could say Hitler was our greatest ally in winning World War II because of all the stupid mistakes he made. Yeah, it's a good thing you made them, too. So, yes, absolutely. I think there might have been some other people around him that were making those mistakes to make sure it failed. Yeah, no kidding. After Operation Valkyrie failed, they needed to do something to I'm astonished there was, 40 attempts on his life. Yeah. Valkyrie, I think, came closest. But it was, I think it was a little bit too late because, it was really the war ended 10 months later. Yeah. So it would have stopped some of the
some of the slaughter, but a great deal of it had already taken place.
Yeah, definitely one of the worst periods in
one of the
planet's
things,
history.
One of the things we can thank Hitler for was not allowing the Panzers into Normandy.
Yeah,
he thought it was a diversion, and he wouldn't release the Panzer divisions into it, and allowed us to get the foothold in Normandy. So, you know, in that respect, he certainly did a great deal of service to our side.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm just glad we blew his brains out for payback. We're almost out of time, Kevin. Ending there, it will be, I think, a perfect spot with Hitler's death. We're almost all out of time. I do want to give you a minute here to plug again the website, your website, so everybody can go and check your books out. Again, the book, which is out on Amazon, The Government UFO Files. The Conspiracy of Cover-Up. That's the official title. Look it up on Amazon.
It's the latest one. It's been out for almost 10 days, I think.
There you go.
The one is Alien Mysteries. That's been out for about a year. Covers it was sort of a brief history of the UFO. So, you know, some of the people who read it said, well, you know, it's too didn't get into the depth that we wanted to, but it was really designed for someone who hasn't spent all these years studying UFOs, so it's kind of bring them into it a little bit more slowly. There's an ebook called Conversation that deals with past lives. It started out as an abduction scenario, and through the hypnotic regression and everything, it ended up in this bizarre past life regression thing that's interesting. I'm not sure
Where can we find that? Is that
that's
online?
an ebook on for your Kindle.
Amazon? Okay.
Ebook on Kindle, and there's some other ebooks. There's some other ebooks. There's a couple of science fiction ebook novels. I think Project Blue Book Exposed, which is a book that's like 20 years old. There's a audio version of it now. I don't even have an audio version of it, but there's an audio version of it now. So a lot of the stuff that I did a long time ago is still appearing on Amazon. In fact, I mentioned this earlier that I did a book called Case MJ12, and some guy wrote a review on Amazon complaining because there was nothing new in it. And something I've never done before, I've actually responded to the review, and I said to the guy, take a look at the copyright. It's 12 years old. Of course there's nothing new in it.
Yeah, with
a bucket.
like I told you should just leave like a bunch of blank pages so you can revise every single copy that's ever printed, 20 years later, add more information in there.
Put out a note on my blog at a different perspective at kevinrandle.blogspot.com. I can just blog posting here. Copy this and paste this into the book. This is the follow-up now. After 15 years, I've learned this, so put that in there.
Yeah, that's wrong.
Yeah, put your link in the books and be like, just follow the website in about 20 years and we'll get more information to you. Promise.
Maybe. Well, but see, Case MJ12 doesn't talk about, for example, the interplanetary phenomenon unit, because I really hadn't looked at those documents, which I've done in the last 3 or 4 weeks, looking at these things, and found all the problems with these documents related to MJ12. And I don't think even Stanton Friedman believes these documents. And so there's updated material that I guess you could plug into the end of Case MJ12 if you wanted to. Man, that's what I should have said. Look at my blog, Clown, and you'll find the update you wish to have.
There you go. Kevin, it's always a pleasure having you on, man. And definitely we have to get you back on before another 4 years pass, because it's just way too long.
Has it been 4 years?
Man, it was 2010 last time I had you on the show.
Are you kidding me? That long ago?
Time flies, man. Time flies. It was
slow it down.
2010, man, time flies so quickly, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Jeez, man, I think it was July 19th.
I guess it was when Crash, when UFOs Fall from the Sky came out.
Yeah, it was around that time.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely have to have you back on much sooner. It's been just awesome having you here.
Yeah,
you guys didn't call Bat Squatch on me.
Yeah, we didn't.
That's right. We didn't call Bat Squatch on you.
I called it 3 times.
And I called it on myself. That's how bad it was of a night for me. Jeez. Guys, thank you for listening in. This is Skywatchers Radio. Please tune back in next week, where we're going to have another exciting guest for you guys to listen to, and hopefully we'll get you to participate with the guest and call in. So many people listening, and it's weird. It's hard to get people to call into these shows, but we love having you guys call in, so please do that. We'll be back next week, like I said, with another great guest. Guess what we're going to have on next week?
Tell us.
Alejandro Rojas and Jason McClellan from Open Minds are going to be with us.
Tell them I said hi.
I definitely will. You got my word on that. Guys, see you next week. For Keith Rowland, for Dark Matter Radio Network, for PSN Radio, I am Angel. That's Alan, and this is Skywatchers Radio. Have yourself a wonderful evening.